The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. My name is Jen Saunders. I'm a Senior Program Officer with the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and I want to welcome you today to our webinar on shared housing as a solution for single adults experiencing homelessness. Just a few logistics before we begin. All the lines are on mute right now. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation, so please feel free at any time to send a question through your questions box. And we will be posting the slides and audio following the presentations on our website, endhomelessness.org. We've also posted a few handouts in the webinar box that you should be able to access, but we will be sending those out along with the webinar materials after the presentation. Let me start out by briefly telling you about the work of the Alliance. It's a national organization committed to preventing and ending homelessness in the U.S. At the Alliance, we identify policy solutions and promote them to the administration, to Congress, and anyone else who will listen. We have a capacity building team that goes out to communities to help them create better systems, and we provide data and information to educate opinion leaders about homelessness and housing as a solution. And most importantly, we learn from providers in the field about what is working and what is not working in order to inform our work. Just a brief overview of the agenda today. Today we'll hear from experts on shared housing, including our own Jamie Day, who's Director of Individual Homeless Adults. We will also hear from 3 excellent providers who will share their expertise on the topic, including Jean-Michel Giraud from Friendship Place in Washington, D.C., Cathy Zall from New London Homeless Hospitality Center in Connecticut, and Meghann Cotter from Micah Ministries in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And with that, I will turn it over to Jamie.
All right, thanks, Jen. I'm going to keep us moving by talking about what we know about single adults who are experiencing homelessness and why shared housing may be a good solution for this group. And by single adults, I mean unaccompanied individuals over the age of 24 who are not chronically homeless. So this means they have not been homeless for long periods of time with a disabling condition. Many single adults do have children or family. However, they are using the homeless services system on their own. And we care about single adults for 2 reasons. First, this is the largest group experiencing homelessness. So we cannot end homelessness without addressing the housing needs for this group. Second, these individuals can be at risk of becoming chronically homeless, so it's important to know when to intervene to prevent this from happening. According to the annual point-in-time count, single adults make up nearly half of the total population of those experiencing homelessness on a single night. And while other groups have had declines in homelessness due to targeted efforts over the last decade, the rate of homelessness for single adults has largely remained the same. So here are some things we know about single adults who are experiencing homelessness. They are most often male, between the ages of 30 and 50, and they are disproportionately African American. And the research so far on this group shows a wide range of how long single adults experience homelessness. So we need to do a lot more research to understand the dynamics for this group. We do know some things about the housing barriers that exist for single adults, such as having a criminal record and racial discrimination, and some health issues. Finally, we know that in most communities, single adults have the least access to benefits, which are largely reserved for families with children or persons with certain types of disabilities. So knowing that there are limited housing options for single adults, shared housing may be a good solution. And shared housing is housing where people, related or not, live together in order to share housing expenses. And this can be coupled with additional services. So this is essentially the same as having roommates, but with some added support. And often the leases are separate so that if one person leaves, the other's housing is not jeopardized. So many of us have had roommates at one time or another, so I think we can all relate to the benefits and challenges of this arrangement, which is why we're so excited to have experts here today to talk about this. And this can work in many ways. People can find roommates on their own, or they can be matched by an organization. People can move in with homeowners or find landlords willing to rent to roommates that have separate leases. Also, nonprofit organizations can provide this kind of housing. So how does shared housing help? Essentially lowering the rent, particularly in high-cost markets, can help people afford housing and may enable them to live closer to jobs or social networks. And also, having roommates can be positive for someone's overall well-being. Finally, this can reduce the pressure on shelters to serve single adults if more low-income housing options are available. So here are some basic components to consider if you're thinking about incorporating shared housing into your system. Communities will want to determine how to advertise shared housing opportunities or whether to target this program to specific individuals. Roommate matching can be tricky, and our experts today can speak to the science or the art of this matching and how that happens. And you may want to consider a community-wide process for matching so that programs or providers don't all have to be experts when it comes to shared housing. In terms of finding housing, supportive housing and rapid rehousing providers should already be well-versed in searching for housing and working with landlords. You may want to consider, however, if there are landlords who are not already engaged in these assistance programs in order to broaden the housing pool. And in some communities, there are shared housing organizations that work with other populations. For example, some work with older adults who are aging in their own homes and are looking for people to move in and help out around the house. And these organizations may be willing to work with you. In terms of shared housing as part of rapid rehousing, HUD, Emergency Solutions Grant, and Continuum of Care rapid rehousing programs do allow for households to live in shared housing with some conditions. And we have provided a detailed resource for ESG and COC provisions. It's one of the handouts provided in this webinar, and we will also provide it along with the recording of this webinar on our website. So we are so excited, once again, to have experts on this webinar who are running shared housing programs and who can speak to how to operate these programs with respect to matching, lease agreements, and services. And we hope that when you are thinking about what to do for homeless single adults in your community, you will consider shared housing as an option, and also let us know how it's working. This is something that we're learning as we go. So anyway, with that, I will turn this over to Jean-Michel with Friendship Place.
Well, hello everybody, and I'm delighted to be on the webinar with you this afternoon. Thanks for inviting me. Friendship Place is a regional services organization serving DC Metro with an array of permanent and rapid solutions. We've had a lot of growth in the last few years, and we've embraced, of course, the Housing First model. And then more recently, we have built up our rapid solutions, and those include homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing, and Job First. So for us, shared housing fits mostly within these rapid solutions and is mostly for single adults. We find some benefits to it that made it a perfect match for what we do in our Home Now rapid rehousing program, but also at Veterans First, the supportive services for veterans families programs, and our smaller privately funded direct housing program. What we are finding is that the solution is so effective that, for instance, at Home Now, it now represents 80% of the placements, and that on average our participants save 30 to 50%. That this solution obviously is more affordable and more flexible. That between the time people meet a potential landlord and the lease up and move in period, the time span is rather short. Sometimes it's even the same day, which is very effective for people, of course, who are living on the streets or in shelter. For us also, what we are seeing is that there are both economic and social factors that make this a good solution. I've just spoken about the economic factors, some of them anyway. The social factors for us are, of course, people sharing a common experience with homelessness, having been there and being able to support one another as they rebuild their lives. Sometimes assembling families of choice which last as natural supports, so the supports that come from peers and that the system doesn't pay for and can last for months or years to come. We are finding that on the landlord side, the response has been positive. People find that it's a good way sometimes to maximize the revenue in a rental unit, maybe use space that wasn't planned for rental space before. Landlords have been more lenient also, sometimes streamlining application process, as I've mentioned before, waiving fees so that people can get in more quickly. This is also a way for us to solve homelessness a few people at a time. We'll talk about the way we help people assemble their households of choice. I feel that it should be used more as a strategy for shelter exits in the large shelters in cities across the country, because this is if we strategically organize groups of people within these shelters who already have a common bond because they've been roommates to move into housing units. I think that we could have good results there by helping these new households be successful outside shelters, and we know that's an issue. And then it's a step up to a more individual living situation for some people, and with the possibility of short-term leases, folks can just be in these situations for a short period of time. We're also seeing that generally in the upswing DC rental market, sharing is more commonly accepted both on the tenant side and the landlord side. So this is a good fit. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the shared household, and I'm doing this intentionally because as we'll see further in the presentation, sometimes there are reactions to these new households and some misconceptions that we'll go over. So the sharing of living space that single adults freely agree to for economic and social support, that's I think a simple definition, there are probably others, of a shared household and of shared living, meaning that people agree to fulfill some responsibilities. They are individually responsible to a landlord or a landlady. They are responsible to one another. Housemates may continue to participate or go. And the shared arrangement, of course, rests on leases. And we'll see that for us, these leases meet the DC requirements or the requirements of the state if we're in Maryland or Virginia, where we create the new households. We find that it's important to remember that the service cycles are different because, again, this is mostly rapid rehousing for us. So somebody may be entering the household and the program while somebody is about to graduate or has already graduated, and that adds some complexity for staff because as you work on your service modalities with each person, you have to be mindful of the fact that the person is still served or not served anymore, and that might impact on your decision making, particularly maybe the way you interact on behalf of the person with the landlord, for instance. The next slide, please. So this one is called Whose House Is It? Because I think it's important again from the beginning to clarify expectations with the housemates and with the landlords, to go over service modalities, to explain what the program does and what it doesn't do. And in particular also to avoid the perception that we are running a house or even a facility, because we are really not running a house. We are providing services to individuals who happen to be living together, and these are mostly, when we think about them, case management like services. So we're not running a facility, and this is important in terms of what we'll look at a little bit later when we talk about community perception also. It's a good investment to do this from the beginning because it saves staff from being pulled into conflicts that may arise if there are some misunderstanding, particularly on the part of landlords, for instance. What we're finding that staff need to be aware of is fair housing laws, of course. They must understand that leases are contracts, that they are to be set up a certain way. I talked about that. And they need to understand community landlord tenant mediation processes in their own communities so that they can represent housemates who are part of the program the best way possible if need be. Next slide, please. So this one is called "This is not a group home," because you sometimes get the impression when you talk to people in the media or to neighbors that we have set up a group home, and again, we simply have not. This is not a program. It doesn't have to be licensed, but there are some cities and states where landlords need to get licenses for their own rental units, and as we know, because we work in the field, these licenses are quite different from a program license, for instance. So these households need to blend in as neighbors, and in our role as staff, we need to think of the danger of stigmatization. We need to be thinking of privacy, and we need to be mindful of confidentiality. People in this household don't have to be monitored by neighbors or other community members because they are just neighbors. Next slide, please. So we're going to set up a household. Staff is going to work on the engagement piece. And of course, for staff who are working out there in the field, and because sometimes the folks who are joining us in rapid rehousing have had less of the clinical training, it's always important, I think, to go over the rehabilitation relationship, what it is and what it's not. Right off, it's not a legal relationship. Our relationship with folks is not recognized in the court, and that's important to know. It also needs to be ethical, of course, and competent, meaning that we have trained people well before they go out to serve. It needs to be progress-oriented, facilitative, supportive. It builds on strength, the way we know, and uses a person-centered approach. It's empowering, of course, but not enabling. And it stays within boundaries, and sometimes we are seeing, of course, that boundaries are a test out there in the field because people are in community settings, not in clinical settings, and it's a little bit more difficult to remember what the boundary is. So some training in that area is important. And then it's not on the slide, but the notion of an individualized process, I think, is important, and of consumer choice. Next slide, please. So this is a good segue, consumer choice, to discuss now the setting up of the household. It's a very dynamic process, of course. People have to choose, make a very important decision or a set of decisions. They are choosing the people they are going to live with, and these choices need to be made, we find, of course, by housemates and not staff. So where we may be thinking of compatibility and some things that make us feel that some folks may be better candidates to share this household in the end, and we may help people, you know, with some of the decision-making process just through guidance. In the end, the real decision is made by the housemates, and that's important. We're going to look at how compatible people are, the impact of trauma issues on the different folks we have maybe, the former and current street ties, because these are important. We sometimes see, of course, we know that the street ties are still active and that folks are invited into the household, and we have to help people negotiate around some of these things. the current use of substance abuse, because we are in housing first, both alcohol and drugs legal or not, of course, and some discussions have to take place around that. The sharing of space and food, creating families of choice, again, this natural resource, peer-to-peer, that can help people anchor down and has I think, a terrific potential in that direction. And then what we do at Friendship Place is that we provide group and individual support, sort of an orientation group that lasts into the first few months or weeks anyway, where people get special attention to anchor down. We go over the leases, we explain what's in them, what it means. We make sure that people are comfortable in the household. I mentioned that the leases have to meet the local standards, of course. That we find that kind of support goes a long way to make somebody comfortable in the household so they don't return to homelessness, for instance. And for practical support, we use pad mappers, Craigslist, some of the other websites, just like anybody else looking for a roommate or a room in somebody's house. We're finding also that concrete things are important, like having dates. How long will the rapid rehousing funding last as a subsidy? Because there is a lot that takes place during the onboarding process, and we assume that quite a few people may just forget some of these details and need to have them on paper, of course, so that's important. Next slide, please. So here we're looking at more ways to engage the household, and we're really looking at household dynamics. And one of the goals, of course, is to create maximum buy-in, because we are still trying to keep people in and avoid their going back to the street, and we know that happens with some folks. We are also trying to maximize their satisfaction in the household so that they can continue to grow as household members. So we find that evenly engaging all the members of the household is a good thing, and by that we also need to make sure that everybody has a voice and that all voices are equal in the households, because of course, depending on the personalities, we could have folks who have stronger voices and who may tend to want to make more of the decisions, for instance, and then folks who are quieter but have feelings that are more or less positive about what is going on. But here I'm taking you all the way down to the end of the slide. We really do need to know if everybody in the household feels comfortable reporting issues, because sometimes significant issues that can impact on the well-being of the household and even on the fact that it will be allowed by the landlord to continue or not, are not reported on time. And it's just a good thing that everybody feels assertive enough to report things that are out of the unusual, so that we can address them more quickly. We've talked about the time element, which is so important, the fact that people are on different service cycles, because this is mostly rapid rehousing. So we need to be mindful of this, because different people in the households have a different status in the program, and that's important. And then a statement that we do not belong between the landlord and the tenant. We are not on the lease, and we can interact on behalf of the tenant, but in the end the tenant will be the person who needs to seek legal help, and we may help that person do that, but they will have to do it for themselves. And so we act as in a way where we guide people, we provide guidance, we advise, but we are not the main party in the arrangement with the landlords. And it's a good thing. We shouldn't try to be. I think it's one of the benefits of rapid rehousing in general, with where people have their own leases, whether it's in shared housing or not, because it's helping us as organizations serve many people every year, because we don't have to be holding leases the old-fashioned way with landlords, which used to be very cumbersome. So it's a good thing. Next slide, please. So We need to engage and support landlords. These folks often come through as a desire to help, but of course because they have their own economic reasons. They need to rent rooms. In this case, within a house, they're finding that renting a house to a group in an upswing rental market is easier sometimes, depending on where the house is, than to rent it to a family. There's more demand for it. So it's a win-win situation. With the landlords, we're going to talk about, of course, responsibilities, expectations. Everything has got to be on the up and up in terms of honoring the conditions of the lease. It's the landlord side of that agreement. Will the landlord, come up with a schedule for visits with the housemates so that they can know when to expect that person, and so that they can build a relationship, and the housemates, for instance, can report issues with the site itself during these visits. The landlord is really responsible for the site, which is key. Sometimes people think that the organization is, and it simply isn't the case. That responsibility is on the landlord side for the site. We have the benefits at Friendship Place of using housing specialists, so they can do a lot of legwork. We have one of these positions in each of the larger programs, Veterans First and Home Now. These folks can do a lot of legwork for us with landlords and can be the folks providing this orientation training, if you want, and ongoing support during the onset to the new housemates. We need to make sure everybody understands rules and expectations, responsibilities, of course, on the part of the housemates. We need to have clear communication. We need to think ahead of what the landlord is planning to do with the unit of the house and how that will impact on long-term planning for this household that we've created. So in general, what we're seeing as a benefit here from our housing specialists is that this position is available to engage landlord groups. That's at the bottom, 10 neighborhood liaison meetings. We do a lot of cold calling also, a lot of mailings. We use web resources, and that position can deal with landlords on a more business-like basis and respond to, for instance, the landlord's need to streamline processes, which is often welcome and allows us to grab a unit where if we had cumbersome processes involving many steps and that seemed too complicated, in a shared situation in particular, staff have reported that we might just lose the unit because the landlord needs to move quickly. So that position is key, to keep an eye out for that and engage the landlord and see what the level of comfort is with the paperwork and how fast we do need to move to be working well with that person. Next slide, please. So the community perception always so important in everything we do in rehabilitation or rehab-like settings, because we are funded by the public and we strive to serve the best way possible and to blend in the best way possible also. So in this case, again, I've mentioned it before, we're not setting up a group home, we're setting up a household made up of housemates who have just chosen to live together for their own reasons, and we really don't have to justify the presence of this household in the neighborhood, because we don't want to create a feeling that somehow folks there are monitored or even stigmatized. This is not a facility, and the organization, again, I've said it, is not directly responsible for the site. The folks living in it are responsible to be good tenants and good neighbors, and the landlord is responsible for the site. But of course, through supportive counseling, community relations, the use of mediation, we are able as staff to resolve a lot of issues during the service cycle that may arise, and sometimes afterwards. So let's take a look at the last slide and see how that works. Post-discharge status, we need to have a clear message with the landlords and the housemates regarding the end of services. So the length of the service cycle at first, and then what it means for somebody to graduate. We need to have worked out internal and external issues if there are any, and to have everybody very conscious again of whose responsibility different things are, so that people understand that there will inevitably be a tendency for landlords, particularly landlords maybe who have been engaged with us more, or maybe landlords who are renting to folks we serve in several sites, to come back to us for problem solving after the fact. We see that quite a bit actually, but we need to weigh what position we're in relation to our agreement with the former program participant by then. Is that person receptive to having us step in? Have we covered all the bases to represent this person again? How far do we need to go? How far should we go, because there are boundaries? And whenever possible, I think it's more desirable for the person to problem solve with the landlord or vice versa on their own. Thank you.
Thank you,
Hi, this
Jean-Michel.
is
Cathy.
Yeah, hi, Cathy Zall. Thank you very much for the chance to share a few ideas with you. We have a sort of different approach to shared housing than Jean-Michel described, so I think you're going to get a picture of that there's a variety of ways to approach this. The next slide, please. So the New London Homeless Hospitality Center started about 10 years ago when the City of New London eliminated their Department of Social Services, and there was no one left to run the winter emergency shelter. And several people died outside, and so we were really a community response. We started out with just a church hall and mats on the floor, and we've sort of grown from there. The next slide, please. So we now have a variety. We are the coordinated access point for our region. We have a 40-bed emergency shelter, daytime drop-in center, social respite, rapid rehousing, permanent housing, and VA grant and per diem. But the next slide, please. I wanted to sort of just share the reason that we got involved with shared housing. Essentially, our focus as a shelter is to really reduce our shelter length of stay. And we found that we had a number of single adults with very low income who did not qualify for permanent supportive housing, didn't have disabilities, or had disabilities but weren't chronically homeless. And we were really just didn't have the rental subsidies to help people with very low income on the long term. And so we realized that if we were going to find a way to reduce our shelter length of stay for this particular part of our population, we had to find a way to access very deeply affordable housing, which is what led us towards shared housing. Next slide, please. So clearly, as I think Jean-Michel described so well, you can definitely have people make their own housing arrangements with however much support that agencies can provide. But we found there were a number of barriers to trying to create shared housing in market rate units. I've just put a couple of them here. One of the most serious barriers we found is that if several people get together and rent an apartment, and one of them stops paying their rent, the other roommates are on the hook for the whole rent. And this was a problem time after time after time, where the group seemed to be together, they seemed to be fine, but then somebody loses their job, something happens, and it really was a financially untenable situation for those that remained. The other problem that we had found was that sometimes landlords are not too excited about the idea of renting to a group. It sounds like Jean-Michel has done a great job of breaking down those barriers, and I think we should do more of that too, but it is a problem. The other, in our area, there are things that are sort of like shared housing, boarding houses, but they're often of pretty low quality. So what we thought about was that if we could, as an agency, either own the building in which the shared housing was taking place or hold a master lease, we could assure the quality of the housing, and we could also solve this problem of transferring the risk of vacancies within the shared housing to us as opposed to the other tenants. So the next slide, please. So the basic features of the shared housing that we do is, first of all, it's 2 or 3 tenants per apartment. Critical for us, each person has their own room. And then in the shared housing that we do, we try to address several key problems that many very low-income people face. First, we include everything in the rent. Utilities, cable, and internet. We have many people in our shelters who have arrearages on utilities and simply cannot get utilities turned on in their own name. So bundling that in with the rent is very important. We allow people to pay by the week. Many people get whatever their income is by the week, and we want them to be able to pay by the week. We have month-to-month leases. They have standard provisions, but anybody that has an opportunity to step up to, housing that they prefer, we don't want anybody tied in, and we don't require security deposits. The next thing we do in the shared housing is that we rent to what might be considered high-risk guests. Now, unlike what was described before, we have no special services. People can come to the Homeless Hospitality Center for assistance that we do. We don't match roommates. We don't have any of those kinds of supports. Listening to it, maybe we should, but we don't currently. We're just trying to provide deeply affordable housing. Next slide, please. So we got started on this because this particular house you see in the slide, there was one person living in this huge house, and when he died, the executor of his estate wanted to try to see if he could make this housing available, this big building available for deeply affordable housing, and so essentially approached us to buy this building at a bargain price from the estate, which we did. Next slide, please. So this is just a picture when we first bought the property. So we would have 3 people. This is a 3-bedroom unit. They share the kitchen, which you see on the top, which we obviously fully equip with everything they need. There is a living room that's shared by the 3 people. And then the bathroom, again, this is as we acquired it. It's been upgraded since then. And, again, there are people who will say, gee, isn't this terrible that people have to share a bathroom, have to share a kitchen, share a living room? But I think when you look at the sort of the spaciousness of it, and you think about our own lives when we've had roommates, it's really not a major barrier, I don't think. There's plenty of opportunities for people to have space and privacy. The next slide, please. But key to the shared housing from the way we're working with it is that people have a private room. And we put a lock on every door. Now, of course, we keep a key, a copy of that key, but each tenant has a locked room so that they have that privacy. We supply all the basic furniture. This is another problem for very low-income people that are moving into an apartment. They don't have any money. This is pretty bare bones in this picture, I'm sorry, but we provide a bed, a dresser. People are free, of course, to bring in their own things and their own decorations, but we make sure when you move in, you have everything that you need. And then in each room, this we learned from experience, we provide TV with cable, internet access, and a mini fridge. And at first we thought, oh, let's just have a TV in the common room and everybody will share. Too many arguments, what were we going to watch, what we're not going to watch. So now we have certainly a TV in the common room, but each room has its own TV, so people that want that privacy can have it. Now, for this particular building, our rent per person per month, everything included, is between $400 and $500 per person per month. If we have a couple, we allow couples, then it would obviously be $200 to $250 per person per month. And just for comparison, the fair market rental in in New London, a studio is $732 and a one-bedroom $861. So at $400 a month, this is something that is affordable to a person who's working only part-time, to a person who has only SSI. This puts their own space, shared bathroom, of course, shared kitchen, but their own private space, I think, very financially within reach. Next slide, please. So I won't delve too much into the numbers here, but I also feel like, at least in New London, where there really are a number of properties that can be acquired at a very reasonable price. Essentially here, we purchased this property, which can house 7 individuals, for a total initial cost of almost about $150,000, or $21,000 per unit. Anybody who's listening who has done housing development will know that that is a fraction of the cost of many other ways of expanding housing access. Subsequent to our purchase, we did use housing tax credit program, which is another thing that's available in Connecticut. I'm not sure where else.
Cathy, are you there? We're having some technical problems, so give us a moment. Sorry. Cathy, are you on? I think that we'll move ahead to Meghann.
Okay.
Meghann, are you on?
Can you all hear
Great,
me?
thanks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Thanks for the opportunity. I feel like I'm learning a lot of different things today about shared housing and whatnot. I think, and that's kind of the philosophy you have to embrace, I think, when you get into this, is that it is kind of an ongoing process of learning and trying to adapt and adjust to whatever it kind of comes your way. So if you can flip over to the first slide. Just a little bit of background about me and my organization. We started off, we're an organization of churches in the Fredericksburg community that in 2005 our community had a 90-day emergency shelter, transitional housing program, and a whole lot of downtown churches who were kind of sporadically taking care of the basic needs of the street homeless. And so they formed our organization, and by all points and purposes, in comparison to other organizations that are on here today, we're probably the youngest. We're often the youngest in the crowd, and sometimes that puts us in a better position to kind of try new and unique things. But our organization was formed after the biblical call of Micah 6:8 to combine efforts of the faith community to address the needs of the street homeless. And so one of the things I've always thought, we have kind of added smaller shelters to our programming over the last couple of years, but from the very beginning, we really had to figure out how to help move people off the street, help stabilize people, without shelter and without people who had a whole lot of resources to work with. So next slide. And like I said, you know, we started out as very much a basic needs organization and evolved to understand that everybody who was walking through our door had that same primary need of housing. Today we have a winter shelter, a shelter that is for people that are coming out of hospital who are homeless, a day center that connects a lot of community services and basic needs services for people, and our income program that works on both disability and employment, and then of course, last but not least, our housing program, which we do actually both permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing in a variety of different ways. So next slide. So pretty much we got into the shared housing component when we realized in this about 5 years into our work, we realized that we had about 83 chronic homeless single adults during our point in time count, which we thought was pretty high for being the small community that we are. But realized even within that there were actually a fair number of them who had income or could get income easily with some levels of support. They just didn't have the, we're a very high cost housing community, and so even a one bedroom or a studio apartment, fair market rent is more than $1,000. So your average person making minimum wage or getting a disability check couldn't really afford to live on their own in the community. And so we, you know, for a number of years we, you know, didn't really know that we could do much of anything, and we just kind of, as by default, got creative with a couple people and started to try and put them in housing together. So next slide. And so after we were successful in kind of a couple kind of default cases, what we realized is that most people who are on the street were in a way already living with someone in some way, shape, or form. Most people camp together, or you know, at least associate with someone else, with some exceptions, which you know, I don't ever want to come across as advocating as, you know, shared housing is the end-all be-all and only solution. And there are some people who will have to live independently for lots of different reasons, but it was really eye-opening to us to really consider that there were that a lot of people already were living with someone else, and most people, even when we kind of took a poll around our office, most people really start out that way when they get out of college or they're first getting set in the working market, and that was a pretty good reality to understand that, you know, a lot of us certainly would like to live on our own, but a lot of times, particularly in a high-cost housing market, it's not a reality. And so, you know, we just started doing more of it, even before we even had rapid rehousing money or supportive housing money. This was really pre that Housing First movement, and we began to drastically impact our chronic homeless and single adult numbers because we were moving people off the street just simply by trying to use the resources that they had. We have had over the years much better luck with private landlords who can oftentimes be a lot more flexible about barriers that people have and some of the issues that come with being unrelated. And I really would say, like, the best thing that ever happened to us was we were simply, you know, a victim of not knowing what we didn't know. And so we really tripped into a lot of this and have, you know, subsequently been pretty successful at impacting the overall numbers. Next slide. So just kind of my, you know, kind of tips for those that might be considering getting into this, I really think you can't honor client choice enough as far as looking into you know, who is it that they would like to live with. Sometimes they don't always make even the best choices, but at least if it's their choice, it's their choice, not something that you made them do. And it just, I think you just set yourself up for failure if it's you know, well, you know, these are the top 2 people on our prioritization list. That never works. So honoring, you know, and really listening to what a client says, you know, they need and they don't need, as far as, you know, do they need to live with a very neat person? Do they, you know, how do they do with substance abuse? What are some of their triggers? And really paying attention to some of that and doing some of the, and looking to match people up. Being flexible, I can't emphasize enough. You know, just because you haven't done it that way, or you didn't initially set out to structure your program that way. I mean, we used to have a initial rule that we would only put 2 people together, but then there came a circumstance that it made sense to put 3 people together, and it's worked fine. It doesn't always work that way. So be careful about kind of creating too many rules that really are not necessarily rules that are really required in terms of making it work. I would say anybody getting into shared housing should, and kind of going with the theme of flexibility, should be prepared to even, if one roommate's not moving out, be prepared to relocate that roommate or even swap roommates. Sometimes you have 2 situations that are bad and you can swap the roommates and it resolves the situation. We end up doing a lot of that, and for a while we thought we'd someday reach a point we wouldn't do that, and my case manager said to me, you know, about a year or so ago, you know, we're just always going to be doing this. And I think that, you know, if you can accept that, it's a whole lot less stressful to accept that sometimes it doesn't go as planned, and you learn a lot, and you learn, you know, a lot for the next time you, if you relocate that person, you learn what you do and you don't need to do. Sometimes it's a really good teachable moment for your client as well. I highly recommend, we've had more and more luck with this recently, but I highly recommend if landlords will let you separate leases where each person has their own lease, so that if one of them isn't paying their rent or one of them is having a behavior issue, the landlord can pursue consequences for that one person and not affect the other. Surprisingly, more landlords than you would think are happy to pursue an eviction on, say, a client who is not paying rent, and you know, take the loss sometimes on that client, and knowing that you're going to have somebody else to put in there. So the more you can work within that, the better it usually goes. And then seeking support. A lot of times, and I've some of the other agencies in our community have a lot of times kind of asked me about this kind of arrangement where one roommate is like setting up somebody to take care of another person or whatever. You really need to treat each person as their own separate situation, and don't look at the other person to be the caregiver or provider for different things. I will say sometimes some of those things naturally happen, and that's a good thing. Sometimes they become friends, sometimes they want to care for one another in any number of different ways, but you should go in and look at each situation separately, and if you need to bring in mental health skill building, or you need to bring in in-home care, do that, and just as if they were in a place by themselves. Next slide. And along the same lines, as I said, sometimes if you have someone some people have a need to care for others and other people have a need for someone to care for them. Sometimes, and there's nothing you can do to make this work. I just want to make this as a point, is sometimes it's a natural product of a match that you might make. Again, I can't emphasize enough, don't go into it treating the one roommate as a caregiver and the other as the person that needs the care, but sometimes you can have a natural byproduct that does work out well for the long term. Using roommate agreements, I'm not a big paper person, so I avoided that for a long time, but if you have a good roommate agreement, it really gives your case manager a tool to really talk the roommates through very critical things so that they have a starting point to go back to if problems arise. And it's the same things you probably had with your college roommate. Who's going to do the dishes? Who's responsible for cleaning, whatever? How are they going to store their food? What kinds of things are going to make you not want to live with somebody? Those things are just really important to talk through on the front end. I can't guarantee you it's going to prevent anything, but it at least gives your case manager a tool to go back to and say, this is what you guys talked about. Do you want to adjust your roommate agreement, or let's talk about why this is happening, because we talked about this and agreed that it was a certain way. Again, private landlords are going to be the most flexible with shared housing. We've had luck with apartment complexes, but private landlords are more than likely going to be easier to work with when it comes to shared housing. And while I said earlier, be prepared to relocate people if you have to. Don't knee-jerk a relocation after the first conflict or the first problem. We've done plenty of that and really realized that a person who is going to have a conflict is probably going to have a conflict with most people. And so sometimes it's a good pushing back a little bit, and even if you have to eventually relocate them, not relocating them at the first sign of a problem. Try to encourage them to work through the relationship, encourage them to try and sort it out. I mean, we've had roommate conflicts that, just kind of the first couple months it's difficult, and then it evens out when they realize, you know what, I have a safe place and I don't know where else I'm going to go. They just kind of work through some things and they're better for it. And then kind of the last tip I have is just identify the conflict and seek to mediate or resolve it. Some things are just not worth it. If there's a constant problem with somebody stealing somebody's food, can you find someone to donate a mini fridge for each of the rooms so that they can store the things that are important to them in their room? If there's concerns about infringing on each other's space, can you decide, what space is belonging to one or the other? So. Next slide. And just kind of the final thing is just kind of our outcomes. As a result of doing, I honestly don't know how we would have done what we've done, and if it had not been for shared housing. We work specifically with the street homeless, specifically with single adults, and particularly favor the chronically homeless. And so if it were, we're a high-cost housing community with not a lot of permanent supportive housing, and I don't think we would have a lot more people on the street if it had not been for using the tool of shared housing. It just kind of our outcomes in the last 12 months, we've housed 81 single adults. Most were high barrier, chronically homeless. Generally less than 10% return to homelessness in just the last year. only 2 of the people we housed ended up homeless. Again, one by choice, and the other one has been since rehoused. And our 2016 point in time numbers, by contrast, were only 16 chronic homeless. So we've reduced chronic homelessness in the last 6 years by 81%, which is pretty exciting to us. And again, I don't think we would have achieved that had it not been for shared housing. And I think that's my last slide.
Thank you so much, Meghann. I believe Cathy is back on. Is that the case?
Yes,
Cathy,
yes, I'm back. Sorry.
All right, we're going to let Cathy finish her presentation. If you let me take a second to get back to your slides. There we go.
Okay, again, I apologize. I don't know what happened there. I was just trying to talk a little bit about developing agency-owned shared housing, and just using the example of that building I showed earlier, where for $150,000 we were able to acquire that building, do the very bare bones renovations, and end up with a property which per unit the capital cost was a little over $21,000, which compared to a lot of housing development is obviously very, very inexpensive. The second thing we were able to do, although the building was quite livable when we first bought it, is we were able to apply for affordable housing tax credits. And we're not a sophisticated organization. We're small. We have, just myself and a bookkeeper, but it was a manageable program to apply for. And we were able to secure $310,000 to completely upgrade the property, new bathrooms, new kitchens, and it's really now just a beautiful property. And the rent is, as I said, still the $400 a month, but we can make that work without subsidies because the capital costs were so affordable. And again, we have people with no subsidies, mostly in our apartments, and they're able to make that rent. Next slide, please. So just to share a few lessons, I think we all know, and I think we've all affirmed that shared housing isn't for everyone, but it's far better than a long shelter stay. And so I think for me, the comparison is not between would it be better if we could provide every person with their own apartment, or should we do shared housing? Because of course we would want everyone to have their own apartment if that was feasible. The question is, does it make more sense to have shared housing if it can shorten shelter stays? Because that's the alternative for most of the people that we are serving. And it can be a stepping stone. Nobody says that shared housing has to be the end of the road. The final thing, and I think the other thing I would say is that many people have alluded to this, you have to pay close attention to zoning rules. Here in New London, we are not a program, but we comply with all zoning rules, and we just try to blend in with the community. And if you're going to do something like this, you have to run in a compassionate but business-like way. We have evictions. We have people that don't work out, and we are the landlord, and we need to do those evictions. And we do enforce lease terms and pay attention to security. We really want the housing that we offer to be superior to what's available in the general market. And basically what you have to do if you want to run at very affordable rents is you have to fill vacancies quickly. But if you run a good building and your rent is really, really affordable and you take care of your properties, it's really not a problem because a lot of people are anxious to live in that kind of a situation. And then finally, just reduce friction where you can. We don't have the staff to do the kind of mediation and other supports that sound terrific that other people can do. So we just have very practical ones, which is give everybody their own room with a lock, a TV, a mini fridge. And I was surprised how far that went in reducing tension between tenants and roommates. So again, thank you very much, and I'm sorry for losing the connection there for a while.
Thank you so much, Cathy, and to our other presenters. We now have a few minutes for questions, and we've received them from the participants. So I'll direct this first question to Jean-Michel. Does your organization have a veterans program? I believe you mentioned that is the case. And if so, are you working with the VA or community organizations to use shared housing options for veterans?
Yes, hi. We do have a veterans program. It's called Veterans First, and it's a supportive services for veterans families program. So we provide prevention and rapid rehousing services, though of course, as some of you know, more rapid rehousing. It's funded by VA, and we work with people in an average of close to 90 days for prevention, about 120 days plus for rapid rehousing. 550 households in DC Metro, and in terms of the housing, we focus on market housing, whether we stabilize the situation the household is in, and this can be, as some of you know, a single veteran or a veteran with his or her dependents. We stabilize the household in prevention or help the person find a new living situation if the folks are homeless already. And then we do have a small pilot that's funded by the DHCD in Maryland, on the state of Maryland, and the leftover money from the Freddie Mac Foundation, and that's a pilot in Prince George's County, Maryland, a county that borders on DC, for veterans' families to help them come out of poverty. It's a longer-term program.
Great, thank you. Cathy or Meghann, did you want to add anything?
Well, people with subsidies available, we haven't found it very flexible as far as those subsidies being willing to support shared housing. Now, again, the person that has a long-term subsidy, has access to their own place. So I'd love to see more flexibility, but at least those people with a rental subsidy can find housing.
Great, thank you. Meghann, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I don't really have any thing to add. I mean, sometimes a carrot for people who could be eligible for a subsidy or Section 8 voucher or something. Shared housing is kind of that first step, and then you can transition them on to something else once that comes available.
Thank you. The next question I think we'll direct to Cathy. Is there something you would not consider for shared housing?
Yes, I mean, you're sharing an apartment with other people, and so if someone's behavior is so difficult, I'm amazed to hear the story about kind of really housing so many chronically homeless individuals. I think that's fantastic. Our focus has been on the person who's very low income, working part-time at McDonald's, working at a minimum wage job, a person with Social Security and only getting $671 a month. So we've really been more focused on trying to serve the needs of low income people whose homelessness is really due primarily to income. So that's been our focus. So I wouldn't say that we've necessarily served the very hardest to house.
Great, thank you. Meghann, did you want to add anything? I know you spoke about it for a moment.
I mean, I definitely think there are people that can't live with other people. And we've kind of instituted, just between our rapid rehousing and our shared housing program, we've instituted kind of a indirect policy that we try to rapidly rehouse people before they're eligible for permanent supportive housing. And that tells us a lot. Generally, a person who fails out of a rapid rehousing situation or whatnot, we learn very quickly that may be a person who just can't live with other people. And generally speaking, if it's somebody who really needs to live by themselves, you're probably talking about a very seriously mentally ill or disabled person, and very likely needs permanent supportive housing. So that makes it a little bit easier on our end. You know, I would steer away from, you know, people with kind of when they're, you know, active mental health issues that, you know, they're not willing to deal with yet, and, you know, things like that. But for the most part, I think you can at least try permanent supportive housing with most people.
Thank you. So the next question I'm going to direct to Jean-Michel. Do you have a wait list for this type of program? And how do you target?
Well, for the veterans program, the veterans call in and then are assessed for the program based on their income and other factors, and we apply the VA standards in order to grant admission into the program. For the Home Now program, that's a city-funded program in DC. So the folks come from us after they've been assessed through our single adult coordinated entry system, and depending on their score in the VIs for that, we accept them into the rapid rehousing program, or they can be routed to the permanent supportive housing program if their scores are higher, or just to housing if that's all they need. So we, on the basis of the whole city, if you want to look at it that way, there is more need, of course, than we can accommodate at any one time, but the flow is steady because there is a referral process.
Thank you. Cathy, did you want to add anything?
No, I mean, we could definitely do much more than we have. We don't have a wait list. Just when we have a vacancy, we look and see, you know, who's available that might be interested in something like this, but we don't maintain a wait list.
Great, thank you. Meghann?
Yeah, same here. I mean, we don't have a wait list for shared housing. I mean, we have our community just moved to a kind of collective prioritization strategy where we're identifying people who are least likely to self-resolve as the next candidates. Kind of one of the things, you know, within that that's somewhat interesting is a lot of times, because we do use shared housing, you know, we'll look at, you know, whoever is the next person that comes up on the prioritization list, we'll look at that person to help us identify who they want to live with, and if that person is even farther down on the list, then we would pull them up if that was what their choice would be. So.
Thank you. Cathy, I'll direct this question to you. How are you handling pets in shared housing arrangements?
We allow pets.
Great. Jean-Michel and Meghann?
It's up to the landlord and the housemates whether there can be pets in the household, but one of the things we do, for instance, in our screening of folks is to determine, you know, if they would prefer that or not, and same with landlords. It's actually a pretty good marketing tool to be able to tell the landlord that, you know, we're going to help them get folks who they feel can be good tenants to them. So whether or not a pet is allowed is up to the landlord in the end.
Yeah, we default to the landlords as well. Generally, steer away from kind of allowing pets as a blanket policy, particularly because when they're in a shared situation, it can make it a little difficult if one has a pet and the other doesn't, or one wants one and the other doesn't. So.
Thank you. This question is for Jean-Michel. How do you staff support services?
Well, we have a team, actually two teams in the two programs I mentioned. Each team makes up a division, so it has a division director, assistant director, some project coordinators, and then reporting to these folks, depending on the program, we have an employment specialist, a housing specialist. On the VA side, we have a benefits and legal specialist who happens to be a lawyer actually, and then case managers. So it's really important, I think, and it really helps the program to have a structure like this because the roles are well defined. Veterans First also has an intake specialist, and from the beginning, people who are calling in for services understand that there are different steps in the process in order to access services, and then we get some work done through this process. For instance, dealing with issues with the intake specialist can help getting a lot of things out of the way that may be a little bit problematic in people's minds in terms of adjusting their budgets and making the harder decisions. By the time they get to a case manager, they can now focus on rebuilding. And as I've mentioned during my presentation, for instance, having housing specialists is really key for us at home now. Our housing specialist I mentioned does a lot of the onboarding, does a lot of liaising and relationship building with the landlords and the community, the religious congregations that may help us, for instance. And so that's also an important piece. But we're finding that the employment specialists on both sides are key also, because when you're dealing with rapid solutions, time goes by so quickly that it's essential to have somebody well trained in job first to help people get jobs. And for us, job first is of course this newer model of job placement where you assume employability, you look to everybody as being employable, you fast track the soft skills training and put the person in an interview setting as soon as possible and then work on supports accordingly.
Thank you. This question is from Meghann. What are the ongoing supports that you provide for the chronically homeless individuals that you are rehousing? And how long does that support go on?
I mean, so each person that we house gets a case manager, either through rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing. And it's really, you know, based on what they need. We put a lot of emphasis on our case managers to get their clients connected to the other supports in the community that they need in order to be stable as quickly as possible. You know, and that could be, you know, mental health skill building or like an in-home caregiver or things like that. We try to get in place, you know, but the case manager is really kind of the air traffic controller per se of trying to get the different people to the table and connect them to things that they need in hopes that we can release them from our program at some point.
Thank you. So the next question, I'll direct it to Cathy to start. What do you do about people who have criminal backgrounds and racial discrimination?
Well, we have quite a number. I would say a large percentage of the people that we're renting to have criminal backgrounds. We don't do background checks. So I would say that we're, you know, pretty much open to renting and really people who can't find other alternatives. But again, I think I just hearing this conversation, what we're doing really is not so much a housing program as, you know, just trying to provide deeply affordable housing. So we're not really providing that many services. So we're really looking, and we don't have any subsidies, so we're really looking for people who can afford to support these low rents. And so but we're not screening anybody out based on criminal background or any other criteria like that.
So for Jean-Michel and Meghann, Do you have issues with landlords that are having, struggling with criminal backgrounds, and also are you seeing any discrimination, and how are you addressing that?
Well, we do, of course, serve folks who have criminal records, and I think in this case it's really helpful to be dealing with private landlords. They can make their own decisions regarding, renting to the person we're presenting them with. It's really also very important to train staff well and for everybody on the team to understand what people's rights are. And with that said, to train the housemates the right way also, and that's what happens during onboarding also, so that everybody is aware of their rights and knows that we encourage them to have these rights respected. The conversations with landlords goes in that direction also. It's always a fine balance, between engaging somebody who you're hoping will rent to your consumers, and at the same time letting them know that we abide by the rules and we have to make sure everybody's rights is respected. So it's usually I feel that those conversations go well. What we're seeing with landlords as issues is more landlords sometimes being sued by a person we've placed for whatever reason, or a landlord trying to evict somebody for whatever reason, and then we need to get to the bottom of, is this reason valid? Has the person done something that just shouldn't be doing? So that the landlord is going to try to end this lease, since we are dealing with individual leases. So that's more what we are seeing in that area.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Meghann, did you?
I mean, certainly, that's a lot of the reason that our clients need us, is because backgrounds and landlord issues and things like that. I think even landlords that if two independent people came to a landlord on their own, landlords would likely be less likely to want to rent to two individual people than they would to people that come with kind of some level of support. Criminal background is always the issue, and landlords you face the same issues you do in any other case. We've had situations where one person has limited to no background and the other person has a significant background, and they may get turned down for a few places before we can actually find them a place. And so that is oftentimes, you don't get around any of the usual issues, as a part of that.
Great, thank you. I think we'll do one more question, and the question is, if each of you had one thing to do over or change in your thinking of how you're programming shared housing, what would it be? And let's start with Meghann. We'll go back to you.
Oh, you're not going to give me time to think about it.
Oh, that's true.
Lots of things. I would say probably the kind of adding the roommate agreement component to it, and emphasizing more on kind of clients being able to choose who they live with and that kind of thing would probably be my biggest thing.
Cathy, do you want to go next?
Well, I think actually from this conversation, I find myself less negative about thinking about doing this with private landlords, and I'm really, going to try to see if we couldn't do that, because I'm encouraged by what I've heard.
Great. Jean-Michel?
Well, looking back on it, maybe to engage the funding source, so in this case the city, for the city program mostly, I think that we could have done more community education around rapid rehousing and shared housing at the onset, and I think it would have served us because now we are having to do that sometimes after the fact, with community members, landlords, even the media. And I think we could have done better by having sort of a public education campaign, maybe supported by the DC Council, explaining what the Council was trying to do by funding these services.
Great. Thank you so much to all of our speakers today. This has been great.
Thank you.
Just one or two quick things before we get off the line. We have posted some shared housing resources. We will also email these out to everybody who participated today. These also include some sample rental agreements that were provided by the programs that participated. A link to the National Shared Housing Resource Center, which may be of interest to many of you, and a funding options table related to shared housing that describes the differences between ESG and COC funding for shared housing. And I also wanted to just let people know, if you're not aware, we have a rapid rehousing newsletter that you may be interested in signing up for. And we have a webinar that's coming up in August on the 18th at 1 p.m. where we'll be hearing about some innovative public-private partnerships that are going on in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania to fund rapid rehousing. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us, and we hope that you'll join us again at the next webinar.